What could a donkey and a giant teach us about the ministry of Jesus? Welcome back to the behind-the-scenes stories from Reliving Mark, Discovering Jesus in Israel. I'm Cosaert, the writer and the host of the series. In this episode, I want to tell you two fascinating behind-the-scenes stories connected to episode 4. A story about a donkey and a story about a giant. Episode 4 of Reliving Mark plays an important transitionary role in the series. It turns the attention from the ministry of Jesus in Galilee to the climactic events associated with the last week of his life in Jerusalem. The episode begins with the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem at the beginning of Passover week, and it ends with his arrest later that week in the Garden of Gethsemane. The episode was filmed over a couple of days in 2 different locations. All the excellent background footage of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem and the reenactments in the Garden of Gethsemane were filmed in a beautiful olive orchard on the Mount of Olives. So the episode gives you a really good sense of what the area would have actually looked like at the time of Jesus. The reenactments of the triumphal entry were actually filmed in Galilee at Nazareth Village, an authentic first century recreation of the hometown of Jesus in Nazareth. As I explained in the episode, the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem was not an accident. It was a messianic event that Jesus had carefully planned days before. Jesus wanted the people to see his entry into Jerusalem as a messianic act that was a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy that promised a descendant of David would come in peace to Jerusalem, riding on a donkey in order to claim his crown. The scene itself was fairly easy to set up. We lined up our actors, gave them palm branches to wave, told them to look excited, and practiced having them honor Jesus by spreading their cloaks on the ground so that the donkey Jesus was riding did not have to walk on the ground. In allowing their garments to be walked on, people were treating Jesus as a king. While training people to act on camera can be a challenge, working with animals is an entirely different situation. Animals just seem to have a mind of their own. And of all animals, working with donkeys is particularly difficult because donkeys are known for being really stubborn. And if a donkey makes its mind up not to do something, it's not going to happen easily. As our director, Rachel Scribner, was preparing the actors for the triumphal entry scene, I decided to head over and see how the preparations were going with our donkey. To my surprise, Amir, our Jesus actor, was not merely petting the donkey, who was named Cynthia, but he had his head right down beside her head like he was cuddling up to her. When I asked what he was doing, Amir told me he wasn't cuddling the donkey, but he was whispering in the donkey's ear, trying to prepare her for her role. He was trying to create a bond with the donkey so she would not get upset and stubborn and ruin the scene. As clever as it sounded, it actually didn't work. At first, things seemed to go well as we started filming the scene. Amir, our Jesus character, had no problem mounting the donkey, and the donkey was gladly willing to follow the person who was leading it. But when the donkey saw the cloaks we had laid on the ground in front of her, she refused to walk on them. She pulled to the left and proceeded to walk around the cloaks instead. When we tried the scene again, she did the same thing. There was no way she was going to walk on those cloaks. She was afraid of them. So we took a break. We brought the donkey over to the cloaks, we picked them up off the ground and showed them to her, and then we took each of her hooves one at a time and placed them on the cloak. And when she was comfortable with that, we then allowed her to stand on the cloaks. And when that worked, we then practiced having her walk back and forth on the cloaks. And sure enough, it worked. The next time we filmed the scene, the donkey had no problem walking on the cloaks. After all the difficulty we had with our donkey, it made me all the more amazed about the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem on a donkey that had never been ridden before. The triumphal entry of Jesus would not have looked triumphal at all if his donkey had refused to let him mount it, or if his donkey had bolted and refused to walk on the cloaks placed in front of it on the ground. While our Jesus character failed to really make a connection with our donkey, Jesus didn't have that problem. In the same way that he demonstrated his power over nature by calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, his riding into Jerusalem on a donkey that had never been ridden before, with all the fanfare and the crowds of people around him, demonstrated his power over the animal kingdom. Now, let me tell you about that giant. Since we only had 2 consistent actors throughout the entire series, Amir, our Jesus actor, and Bill Thompson, who played the role of the Apostle Peter, we had to work with extras for all the other actors. While we had no problem finding people who were willing to help us, we didn't always know who was joining us until they actually showed up for the shots. It turns out, of all the people who joined us, I was only surprised once, and that took place when we were filming the reenactments on the Mount of Olives. We were looking for 2 people to play the role of James and John, who along with Peter were with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. What surprised me was that the person playing John was a giant. He had to be about 7 feet tall, and somewhat ironically, his name was Tall. His height was even more pronounced since all the other actors were not even 6 feet tall. This was really obvious in the scenes where we see all of them walking together through the Garden of Gethsemane. Since we didn't want his height to be a distraction, we tried to downplay it by limiting the scenes that showed him walking with the others. And when we had to show Peter, James, and John sleeping while Jesus was praying, we had the disciple John lie down with his head on James, rather than sitting under the tree beside them. As I've reflected on that, I thought, isn't it funny how we create in our minds a picture of what we think Jesus and the disciples must have looked like? So when we see a new film about Jesus and one of the characters doesn't fit into our preconceived opinion, we say, that person didn't look like Jesus. When in reality, none of us really know what Jesus or the disciples really looked like. But the truth is, we do that also all the time today with the followers of Jesus. We size people up spiritually all the time by the way they look, by the clothes they wear, by the cars they drive, or by the way they talk. We get so caught up with all the external realities that we fail to remember that what matters most to Jesus is the heart of a person, whether their heart is really open to Him. The truth is that the real followers of Jesus were probably just as diverse as the followers of Jesus today. Some were probably shorter than others, some were more stout, others skinny, and Jesus may have even had a giant disciple like our John. But in the end, Jesus didn't focus on those things. He focused on the condition of the heart, and we need to do the same thing. So how did we find our Jesus character? I'll answer that question in our next episode of the behind-the-scenes stories of Reliving Mark. So I hope you can join me for that. Until then, take care, and thanks for watching.